I've learned that the most important questions don't have answers, they just have more questions in response. And one of the most fundamental questions that I've tried to run into in my life is, who am I? I began to realize I was not a boy. I think it took more time to figure out that just because I wasn't a boy meant I didn't have to be a girl. My name is Alok. I'm a writer and performance artist. I'm trying to challenge a world that isolates us from one another and prevents us from talking about the things that are most important to us in public. When I was a little kid, I lived life on my own terms. I utterly hated boys' clothes and the expectations that were assigned to me as someone supposed to being a boy. I was taught that so many parts of myself were incompatible, that I wasn't allowed to be free, and that was called masculinity. I try to flip the script in that question and say, when did my joy become too much for this society? When did my creativity have to be policed into the binary? I'm actually fighting for a world where all people are able to self-determine their gender. What I want to challenge the gender binary, not man and woman. I want man and woman to be two of millions. I want man and woman to be able to exist without having to be in tension or in opposition. I want people to be able to say I'm a woman, and for that not necessarily to mean, and therefore I'm not masculine and I'm not a man. I want people to be able to say I'm a man, and for that not to mean therefore I'm not a woman or not feminine. You contain multitudes, and I think that what we should be doing is just surrendering to the complexity of ourselves and other people. I make art because people are looking at me, but they're often not listening to me. People are looking at me, but people aren't actually thinking about what it would be like to be me. And I feel like when it comes to the trans community, we're so often looked at, but so rarely regarded, as if everything that we do is about our genders, as if I walk around and I think about gender every single moment of my day. To be honest, I'm kind of bored of the current conversation giving visibility to marginalized people, as if visibility is what we were asking for. What we were asking for is a recognition of our dignity. Visibility takes this kind of dangerous currency in our community. People require us to be visible, otherwise they misgender us. But then when we are visible, we get attacked and there's no resources for us. What I want is more ambitious and more complete than visibility. What I want is a total and fundamental shift in perspective that doesn't require us to be visible to be seen. When you're falling down, you try to grab for something to not hit the ground, and I grabbed and I found the stage, and I grabbed and I found the pen. Poetry is the way that I live my life. The thing about a poem is that you're less interested in being rational as you are in being sentimental. Today I realized how similar diaspora and dysphoria look on a page. We've always been made to feel foreign in our own bodies, a guest overstaying welcome, a resident of a place we are constantly reminded we don't belong to. Isn't diaspora its own form of dysphoria? Asking for gender is another way of asking, where did you come from? Sometimes when I answer, water comes out. I don't know what my gender is. I don't know where I'm from, what happened to me 10 years ago, but what I do know is that I'm trying. And that feels like enough.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation, transgender, intersex, and gender non-conforming health and well-being. I am Daniela Reynolds. I am a care coordination specialist here in the North Sound ACH. My pronouns are she, her, ella. Mi nombre es Daniela Reynolds. Trabajo como um, especialista de coordinación de la salud in the North Sound ACH. We were just listening to the poet and performing artist Alok by Menon. For more of Alok's transformative work on gender identity, check out their wonderful conversation with the host of the Man Enough podcast, which we will drop in the chat. Today, we will start with some grounding in our purpose and vision, then hear from our panelists, and finally wrap up with questions from you and our audience. I am going to read show you now the land of acknowledgement, which is something that we do in our in all our meetings because for the NARS and ICH, it's really important to recognize where we are and the presence of the people that were here before us. We begin by acknowledging with humility to bring us into community together. We honor those who came here before us and who are present today through the North Sound ACH land acknowledgement. I ask you that you take a moment to reflect on ancestral lands that you and your family might inhabit. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is embodied in the waterways, shorelines, and valleys and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since times immemorial. For folks in the audience who might be new to our network, Northern ACH is a community driven nonprofit that works inside systems and with community partners. Our goal for everyone in our region to get health, social, and community needs met in ways that work best for them. By connecting partners, sharing resources, and supporting solutions from the community, we are building the future of health, belonging, joy, connection, and opportunity for all. At North Sound ACH, whenever we gather, we remind ourselves that we are here to learn, to reflect, and to practice belonging. And these are our agreements for being in community with each other. We invite you to embrace these some actions today in our time together. We center curiosity, courage, connection, care, and compassion. We strive to acknowledge our own biases and create a space for growth. We practice empathy and personal vulnerability. We listen to rather than respond. We affirm that what is said in the gathering space stay here. What is learned in that space is what leave. Give me a thumbs up if you agree. We met at a time when our trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming community is under unimaginable pressure and attack, threatening access to healthcare, education, travel documentation, and even identity, and existence itself. Today, learning session is designated to equip those who of us in public service, social workers, public health professionals, organizers, educators, with some knowledge and courage to respond with care and commitment to ensure that we are on testing in our commitment to full and complete health equity and dignity for every person. In our limited time together, we won't be able to address or solve all of the issues facing this community under threat. But we hope that you walk away with some sense of urgency and also the hope that and resolve that is necessary to change outcomes and create more welcoming, thriving community for our learning goals today are to increase awareness and support for transgender, intersex, and non-binary community members in the Northern region, to build knowledge of legislative and judicial action restricting access to care and other civil rights protection, to increase advocacy for access to gender affirming care. In every learning session, we center ourselves on our learning vital conditions for health and well-being, one of our Northern ACH primary guiding frameworks. And while every condition is necessary for any community member to thrive, for these sessions, we want to call out the important vital condition of all, belonging and civic muscle, as well as basic needs for health and safety, and the ways those conditions are expressed to freedom from stigma and discrimination, freedom from trauma, and the fundamental human right to fully accessible and responsive physical and mental health care. While vital condition frameworks identifies what every person and community needs to thrive, the social ecological model of anti-trans violence explains how discrimination, stigma, and violence operate across multiple levels, from individual, structural, and deeply rooted in systemic deprivation of the vital conditions. Population data is conflicting or often missing and erased for the trans, non binary, intersex, and gender non conforming community. And we talk about that later. But a recent study from the Pew Center suggests that approximately 1.6% of adults in the United States identify as a trans and non binary, including more than 5% of young adults. As you can see, the generational divide is significant, with younger people more likely to claim their authentic identity as part of society evolve. The percentage of adults who identify as intersex is about the same percent as those with red hair. About 20% of all trans adults rely on Medicaid for access to healthcare. As we will see, the legislative and judicial landscape for this small community far outweigh the demographic presence, with legislative bills, executive orders, and Supreme Court decisions that weaken protection for everyone outside of an adopted gender norm. In the last 4 years, there has been an astounding 500% increase of state and federally sponsored bills targeting trans, intersex, non binary, and gender non conforming people. From bills 143 from 143 bills in 2021 to at least 947 this year to date. In Washington state, 8 bills were proposed, primarily targeting youth and inmates correctional facilities. Each of these bills failed during the legislative sorry legislative session. You can see in this slide a breakdown of many of the bills across the nation, with much of the focus of deliberate erasure of LGBTQIA plus youth. At the executive level, 15 executive orders so far this year have worked to exclude and erase trans, intersex, non binary, and gender non conforming people from a array of the rights and opportunities from sports to the military, employment opportunities, and gender care. And recent, the Supreme Court opinions have reinforced exclusionary actions at the state level, ruling in Skagit that gender affirming care bans do not violate the 14th Amendment. Equal Protection Clause in Muhammad X. Taylor that parents can opt children out of public school instruction that includes positive representation of LGBTQ plus lives. Seeing all of these actions together can be very overwhelming, but it's so important to understand the breathtaking scale of the movement to erase the existence of the trans, intersex, non-binary, and gender non-conforming communities. And it's also important to recognize that even within sanctuary states like ours and California and others, there is a pull overhanging access to care, as clinical services are shudder or drop off the radar due to the loss of funding or an anticipatory compliance for the fear of political reprisal. Federal subpoenas for patient healthcare information have now been issued for more than 20 providers and clinics across the nation that are accused of threatening transgender youth. It is also critical to understand that all of the conditions and exclusionary outcomes noted above are intensely magnified for Black and Indigenous trans women who face disproportionately high negative outcomes from all the measures, including fatal violence for out of five. Four out of five transgender Americans who are victims of fatal violence are transgender women of color. Intersectionality is essential to addressing disparities and bias faced by the trans community. It recognizes that trans people do not experience discrimination in isolation. Race, class, disability, immigration status, and other identities achieve access to care. Safety and opportunity centering intersectionality means we can respond to the full complexity of trans life and build solutions that are truly just, inclusive, and transformative for all. Despite this daunting landscape, what we know is that every major professional, medical, and mental health organization in the United States supports access to gender affirming care as a evidence based, medically necessary, and often life savings. Their positions are grounded in decades of clinical research, best practice, and patient centered care, an ethical standard that affirms the rights of transgender, non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming people to receive appropriate individualized care in consultation with trained healthcare professionals. We are living through a moment of extraordinary pressure and possibility. These policies aren't just political talking points, they having real daily consequences for people's safety, mental health, and ability to access basic care and dignity. Even in a state like ours, which does not much more than some to affirm the dignity of trans and gender non-confirmed life. But today is not just about naming injustice. It's about moving forward with the purpose and that we brought together an extraordinary panel of leaders, people who are working in the intersections of healthcare, public health, social service, education, and grassroots organizing. They bring life experience, deep professional knowledge, and vision for what true solidarity and affirming care look like. I am honored to introduce our panelists by name. Our panelists. Wait a second. There we go. Linden Jordan, he, him, um, coming from PFLAG, Skagit. Serin Bond-Yancey, Day Annie, Executive Director from Transwa, and ChrisTiana Obey-Sumner, Founder, Principal of Consultant Epiphanies of Equity.
Oh, I didn't know that was my cue to actually introduce myself or not. So sorry. Yes, my name is ChrisTiana Obisar. Today, the founder of Epiphanies Equity. Epiphanies of Equity was created in 2017 as a product of advocacy that I did within my job there at Harborview as a youth board, especially about ensuring that intersectionality is established, but also the policy procedures, patients, especially from the clinic. The clinic that I worked in was had a lot of folks who were of the LGBTQIA plus community, and so to who want to achieve their goals of social equity. How do you actually make sure that you do that from concept to actual product of those things? So in addition, some of the things I might share today, I also identify as autistic, sick, and mad. A lot of my foundational framework is of disability justice, which includes intersectionality. And as a non-binary trans person, I also perform as a burlesque performer in a troupe, in a community of other folks who are all LGBTQIA plus, people who are fat, people who are majority, people who are the sort of folks who need to be amplifying their voices in leadership.
Hi, I will go next. I'm Linden Jordan with PFLAG Skagit. If you're not familiar with PFLAG, we are the largest nonprofit organization nationally that advocates for, supports, and educates about the LGBTQ plus communities. And I myself have been involved with PFLAG probably around 15 to 20 years. And most recently, I've been president of PFLAG and just handed over the baton. But the thing I do that I am most passionate about is that I'm with the Speakers Bureau. My qualifications for this, a few. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I also have a law degree. I have a very checkered past, which I probably shouldn't share with you and won't, but I've done a lot of different things. But in all of those, I've had a focus on social justice. And in particular, because of my own life experience, you probably can't see my t-shirt, but my t-shirt says, I was a trans kid. And I was a trans kid and have walked the path of this strange relationship with gender. Alok is my hero. I love that video. I also just want to give a quick comment to say that when we do land acknowledgements here, I'm also really respectful of the original teachers about how to accept people of different genders, and that is our indigenous population. If only we had learned that lesson, and many others. I would also like to thank North Sound ACH for inviting us and doing this panel today. It is so important, and thanks to all of you for participating. We really want to try as best we can to meet the things that you would like to know today, and there is so much. My primary role today will probably be my passion, which is to talk about the science of gender. We'll talk some more about that as we get into questions, but I've given this talk to hundreds of organizations, thousands of people. We have this talk on YouTube under PFLAG Skagit's channel, and it is about where this whole thing like sexual anatomy and gender and all these variables come from a scientific point of view, but we'll get there. So I think this leaves you, Serin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi y'all. It's great to see so many folks here. I'm Serin. I use any and all pronouns, and I'm speaking to you from unceded Nisqually land, so actually in the South Sound region. As a trans system fluid person who also works in multiple spaces related to this topic, I'm really immersed in this in all areas of my life. My primary connection with North Sound ACH is that I'm the executive director of TransWA, so that's the short version of their name, the Transgender Health and Wellness Center of Washington. And we work with trans and gender expansive people across the state. We provide opportunities for partnership and community, mental health services, and then we also do systems change and integrative programs. Integrative programs meaning just combining other kind of layers of social change. We also do trainings, consultation, referral partnerships and stuff to providers, clinics, other organizations, and really trying to build out the network of folks in Washington state who are providing accessible, culturally responsive, and gender affirming care and services. And then some kind of other layers of me. I also, in addition to working at TransWA, I've been an organizational development and systems change consultant for about 20 years. I specialize in equity, accessibility, and impact. And of course, a lot of that work relates to this and has for a long time. And then also, very recently, since completing my master's of social work, I've opened a coaching practice, and I primarily working with disabled, neurodivergent, and chronically ill folks. And as many of us know, that is a huge overlap between disability and neurodiversity with gender diversity. So yeah, again, really just kind of all aspects of my life. And then also my own lived experience. I bring lived experience as a fat, queer, white, disabled, ADHD, trans, and system fluid person. System fluid is a term under the gender fluid umbrella, and it just means that my gender fluidity is attached to dissociative identity disorder, other or multiple self states. So I have over 30 self states as a system. Formerly known as, like, some people might be more familiar with it as like multiple personalities. That's the old word for it. But it just means that my gender fluctuates along with my self states, and that is, yeah, very, very common for people with dissociative identity disorder, actually. I also bring a ton of privilege, which I want to acknowledge as a white, educated U.S. citizen who also is generally verbal and uses spoken English to communicate. I have a lot of privilege, and I also will end my introduction by just kind of bringing attention to those of us who, within the transgender expansive community, who are not here and not able to participate in this way, not because we don't want to speak out, but because of legacies of colonialism and the current socio-political landscape. Being a visible trans person is just an inherently political, inherently risky act. So I want to hold space for folks who can't be here and can't be visible, even if they want to be. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. I'm really grateful for all of the attendees and excited to learn from ChrisTiana and Linden, and yeah, engage with folks in the chat and Q&A. So thank you all.
Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself, for letting the participants a little bit know, letting the participants know a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and how you every day give a little bit of all of your person to make this world a better place. What is standing out of you? What's one idea, resource, or mindset you're taking back to your workplace community from today's session? Well, we have some questions that we're gonna make to the panelists today. The first question is, misinformation about trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming identities and healthcare is being weaponized to justify harmful legislation. As community leaders, what are some of the most persistent myths that you encounter? How do you push back with care and clarity?
I know when I looked at these questions, my response to that first question was to say to Keiko, how much time do we have? Because the list is so long when we talk about disinformation. I think that one of the things I would like to talk about in this regard is that ignorance and disinformation, some of it is just lack of knowing. Some of it is deliberate weaponization and a target for the trans, non-binary, intersex communities. And in trying to reach out through PFLAG to educate people, that has been the impetus for the science of gender. I talk a lot about where gender comes from, how gender is not the same as sexual anatomy. And so I would say the first myth is that there are two genders, there are two sexual anatomies. I mean, I don't even think the administration knows how to frame this. They keep trying to find a way to make this make sense. I think currently what they say is that it's what's on your birth certificate, which is really laughable. So anyway, I just want to introduce people to the idea that you have to talk about sexual anatomy as being in the first 9 months after conception, because that's where sexual anatomy is formed. And I think there is a common belief that we're all born either with penises or with vulvas and vaginas. And wow, that's rich, isn't it? Because we also know, because we are students of this, that that is far from the truth. And that even if we all did have penises and vulvas and vaginas, even they would all be different from each other. We are unique in many ways. One of the areas that I'm very concerned about is I think we are grossly negligent in terms of talking about our intersex community, because these are the folks that we know birth certificates rarely accurately identify. And we also know that in spite of the fact that there is a ban on gender affirming surgeries, my friends, that there is an exception made for intersex infants, meaning that we can do genital mutilation on babies. We can do surgical procedures on vulvas to make them smaller and to make them more acceptable to parents and to our culture. And that to me is criminal and an area that we need to be focused more on. So the myth about gender, let's define how is sexual anatomy formed? How is sexual anatomy formed? It's in the first 14 weeks in utero. I mean, sexual anatomy's done. 14 weeks. Some people don't even know they're pregnant by then. XY, XX, get out of here. We've known for a long time that the 23rd pair of chromosomes have at least 16 different ways of combining. And I'm talking about at least 16 ways. And any of these variations create variations in all of us. And sexual anatomy is formed by 14 weeks in utero. And yet this thing up here that's called our brain, that has a huge amount to do with gender, the frontal lobe doesn't even start forming until 3/4 of the way through pregnancy. So I urge you to check out the video I do to really educate yourselves, police, especially as healthcare providers. We need a language, because everything that is all of the misinformation right now has one goal. And the goal is to create empathy blocks in the culture about us as trans people, as intersex people, as non-binary people. If we can create disbeliefs that help others dehumanize us, then that is the arena in which they are playing. And that's what all these bills are. That's what the legislation is. Okay, I'm going to shut up now and let somebody else talk.
Thank you so much for that, Linden. It is really interesting to hear your knowledge and everything you had to say about this, because a lot of people doesn't know this and doesn't have the information, and then the judgment and the bad things came from the lack of knowledge. So thank you so much for your answer. The second question will be, what are the most significant gaps in healthcare access or delivery for trans people right now, and how can healthcare systems also better serve non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming people whose needs might be erased even within the trans-specific services?
Daniela, do you mind if I actually speak a little bit to the first question before I move on to the next one? Is that okay?
Sure, sure. If you have anything else to add, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and they kind of tie into each other. So I think there's a lot of overlap between how I would address both of these questions. So there's two big things that I think are both misinformation and also, because of the lack of understanding, gaps in healthcare and services. So the first one, I think, is the first kind of misconception is the minimizing of the impacts of anti-transness and of inaccessible care. So just for like some of the most some of the biggest impacts that this can have, just in my immediate circle, like friends, family members, colleagues, folks I know at work, since the election, we know 5 gender expansive people who have passed away. 2 of those people were under 18. And that's just people I personally know who they are. That's not, at scale. Anti-trans legislation and identity-based stress, which is stress caused by discrimination, a culture of anti-transness, the fear of just, being out and being yourself, that has like very measurable and lived impacts. And it's not just, the mental health impacts are huge. And we know, I think, more about the mental health impacts: suicidality, self-harm, substance use, things like that. There are also a lot of economic impacts. So anti-transness leads to under and unemployment, houselessness, a lot of like extreme poverty conditions. And then there's also really significant physical health impacts of chronic stress. And this is like, so it's not just like mental health can lead to negative outcomes. Physical health is also leading to chronic stress and other negative physical health outcomes and decreased lifespans and things like that. So when we're talking about gaps in care, I think that there's just this big missing link in folks understanding that these cultural issues and the mental health issues that are resulting from them, there's also all these other types of issues. So that's one really big thing. And then the other thing, which I think, again, goes into both misinformation and the healthcare gaps, is that when we're talking about trans folks, who we're talking about is whatever you think that population size is, it's bigger than that. So every estimate that we ever have had up to this point, other than probably indigenous cultures before colonization, all of the estimates after that point are incorrect. There's a reason that when you look at data, youth and young adults are way more likely to be out as trans or gender expansive. And it's not because it's like some viral phenomenon. It's because they are building off of our trans and queer ancestors, primarily our Black and brown trans sisters, the foundations that they have laid to become safe enough or brave enough to be out. And then also, like, there's huge overlaps with like the neurodivergent population, disabled and chronically ill folks. And so especially in settings where we're talking about like health and well-being, we have to really be mindful of who we're talking about and what these impacts really are and the extreme expansiveness of what we're actually talking about.
So can I follow up with Serin with the combined answer too? So this really quick, like, with the first question, like one of the most persistent myths that we encounter, I think, is that gender diversity is like somehow new or like worse, like some pathological thing. And this erases all the historical and cultural and spiritual presence of trans and non-binary and intersex people across time and space. So when systems frame us as anomalies, they justify their policies that erase our data and our needs and ultimately our lives, right? So I often say, like, people confuse visibility with legitimacy. They see like feminists, like I'm a non-binary person, but in my gender identity, but my gender expression, it's kind of like femicenter, right? And so people just like look at folks like me and assume that I'm just like remixing cisness or something like that. But like what, in a lot of ways, what at least I can speak for myself, what I'm actually trying to do is kind of like disrupt the entire foundation of how gender is constructed and enforced, because that disruption makes people uncomfortable, especially those who are invested in binary systems, which we're seeing more and more in our legislation. So the problem is that these myths don't just live in social media echo chambers like Serin was getting to. They shape real outcomes and delayed care and misdiagnoses and gatekeeping. And we've seen even death. I used to work at Madison Clinic, and I have seen this sort of progression even in spaces where it's supposed to be centered in this community. And so I'll say this: if your science or your work or your research does not account for intersectionality, it's incomplete. If your data doesn't include us, it's not neutral, it's violent. And to use it as violent. So we need clinicians and researchers and decision makers to interrogate not just what they think they know, but why they believe it and who benefits from that vision of the truth. So quickly for the question two, to lead into that, there's significant structural and epistemic gaps, in healthcare for trans and gender diverse people, particularly for like non-binary, intersex, and disabled individuals. Like Serin was saying, like whose experiences often fall outside of the standard protocols or diagnostic frameworks of that social construct thing. So like one example is like care pathways, right? Like I said, like working at Madison Clinic, even with the best of intentions, they always say like there's well-intentioned and then there's well-aware, or the road to hell is paved in good intentions, right? So it's not about being bad, it's about being aware, right? And so sometimes care pathways will often assume like this linear binary transition experience, right? But many of us like move through like non-linear, culturally informed and disability aware like gender journeys. That doesn't mean that we're like outliers. It means that the model is limited and it doesn't include the intersectionality and the diverseness that we need. So like working in Madison Clinic, I watched how burnout and systemic bias kept practitioners from asking deeper questions about the role of racism and the housing instability as a housing coordinator and disability and clinical outcomes. Like it's not just about giving someone meds, it's about whether your system is resourced and ready to believe the patient in front of you. So disabled trans folks, as a global majority, navigate these medically racialized ableism every day, and that's when this racialized bias and ableist assumptions and gender surveillance collide to distort how care is given or withheld. So Until caring is relational and intersectional and trauma-informed, it just won't be libertarian. Self-talk.
Yeah, right on, ChrisTiana. Just to pick up with what you were just talking about is, in order for healthcare delivery systems to take us into account, you've got to see us. You've got to be seen by these systems. And, again and again, I mean, it's an interesting perspective that I have being on this panel, because all of you look at me and you go, what's the white dude doing here, right? I mean, come on, really. And so, but it's interesting because we all play a role in the education piece of this. We all play a role. And I think about ways in which ChrisTiana and Serin, there are communities that you can speak to, that you can have an impact with. And that's one of the things I think in walking into spaces like the Kiwanis Club and the Rotary Club, places like that. That's a place that needs education. It's those regular folks out there who are wearing the red hats, if they're willing to listen. Sometimes who they're going to listen to is people that look like them. One of my favorite things to do with the Rotary and Kiwanis Club is to go in there to all these old white dudes and just be one of them. Be one of them. Give my talk, do my thing, and then at the very end say, hey, what did you guys look forward to in retirement? And all these guys, well, we travel, we play golf, and it's like, that's interesting. When I retired, I transitioned. And it's like, the look is like, holy, you've got to be kidding me. What does that mean? You're trans. But that's a segment that I can talk to. But I think about all my trans, intersex, non-binary family here going to doctor's offices. This really came out in COVID, really came out during COVID, because people needed to get health care and our community did not go. I was part of a group with Skagit Public Health, and they were trying to create a report about who is being taken care of and not being taken care of during the giving of COVID services. Well, there was a huge gap in data. There was nothing even mentioned about the LGBTQ plus community. Even the public health department didn't see us. And when you think about that, you think, well, if that structure can't even find a window, how do we look at insurance companies? There are a lot of people here from Molina. There are a lot of people here from insurance companies. I'm very curious to know, what is it that you're looking for here from us, from voices from our community? How can we help? I mean, I've done tons of trainings for clinics, for emergency rooms, for EMTs, for paramedics, talking to people about working with our community. Well, the biggest issue is, do they see us? And is it safe to be seen by them? My greatest fear right now, when I look at the United States map, as Keiko showed there, I look at all those red states and I think to myself, here is a real impact on our community. I can't travel to those other states. You can't either. If you are trans, if you are intersex, if you are anybody in my community, I can't believe how many people naively say to me, I'm taking my family to Texas this summer. My kids, don't worry, I'm gonna leave my trans son's hormones at home. No one will even know my kid is trans. Great. What if your kid gets sick? What if you're in a car accident? What's the first thing they're gonna do? They're gonna pull up medical records. Do you think they're not gonna access that your kid identifies as trans male? And what happens to the triage system when that takes place at an emergency room? Do you really think they look at us when our genitals don't look like what we identify as, when our genitals don't match it? You really think we're the first on the list in Texas or in Florida or in Arkansas or in Louisiana? That's another real effect on our community. We can't cross the borders. We're going to be on lists. Anybody that identifies in our community. That is real. That is reality.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your insight and for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. Is really impactful. We sometimes don't even think about this. Like, you think because we live here in Washington, we think everything is gonna be like Washington, and we look at maps like this. It's like, wow, this is incredible. So it is it is good to learn these kind of things to be more informed and help our communities. Uh, the next question is, trans justice is deeply linked to racial justice, reproductive justice, and disability justice, as well as housing justice, food justice, employment, and police reform. How can we better align our movement, services, and messaging to reflect these overlapping truths, especially in the coalition work?
I'm curious, ChrisTiana, if you do you want to start?
Sure. um, I think, like, going back to intersectionality stuff, I think that's really, really important to consider is like trans justice is not separate from all the other areas of justice. It's not separate from racial justice. It's not separate from housing justice. It's not separated from disability justice. Everything's interwoven. We're all sort of, our multidimensional tapestries of these different sort of threads. And it's as if when we have that intersectional erasure happen to us, that they only want to focus on one particular thread of our tapestry, which is not, it's the only thing that you're going to do is you're going to, at best, snag it, at worst, unravel. And we've seen with the legislation, we've seen even I feel like we were talking about, like, in Seattle, it's one of these situations where people are like, oh, we're safe, we're a sanctuary city. Well, I mean, one of the things that has been the most heartbreaking doing social equity work in Seattle, or Washington, or Pacific Northwest, or the I-5 corridor, is that there is both an impact that is similar to the impacts that we see in other areas of this country. It's just different. It presents itself different. And two, I think the conflict averseness plays a part, but people are really, really, like, resistant to thinking about the ways that their body mind might be fractaling off impacts into space with others unintentionally. And it's just because we're just like fish in toxic water, right? So, like, these systems of oppression don't operate in silos. So our liberation work can't either, right? So, like, let's be real. Cross movement work is hard, really hard. It's painful because we're all carrying that grief and an urgency and a limited capacity. Any growth process is painful. Even if you think about, like, hey, I want to get more tone, and you start to go and do, whatever that process is, it's going to be painful. When you think about puberty, that was painful. When you think about any growth process, that's painful. Even when, I've been gardening, I think about, like, a seed going in the ground, having to literally break themselves apart and then push through barriers to get to what they need in their survival. If we were to look at it that way, that would be painful, right? So often organizations that I've seen in my work, they will get caught in this trap of branding over building. So trying to market solidarity without doing it. And there's a difference between knowing a thing, believing in the thing that you know, and then actually doing it. And doing it is not going to be the same as strategizing about it necessarily. It's when you have your strategy and then you put it into motion. And there is an expanse. There is something happening between what people know and believe and what they do. So one of the things that folks can do is starting to build effective coalition work, which is going to demand more than partnership. It's going to demand shared risk and shared repair and shared responsibility, and that's going to look like centering the most impacted, their voice and leadership of the most impacted in all levels of decision making, not just in the panel, the focus group, but like directors, right? Like, we have to ensure that they are also not just amplifying our voices in leadership, but as a resource to lead without burning out. The economy is bad. I just had, it was a partner, for a research project, and I'm like, well, we have $30 gift cards. I'm like, I appreciate that you're trying to give a honorarium, but $30 is not even enough for like eggs, cheese, milk, and bread. It's sad. So, we all have heard like Audre Lorde's famous quote that she taught us, that they taught us, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so if we know that and we believe that, what we need to do is create new tools. We need new tools to break it down. And those tools are only going to be shaped by community care, ancestral intelligence, and, a refusal to replicate harm in the name of progress. I think it's when I started doing the social equity work, the whole thing started as a youth leader at 15, started doing it within a professional life, and then I started EOE, and I started doing it. EOE is somewhere between 325 and 350 clients that I've had. And the biggest thing that I have seen is that there is this tendency to see this work as an obligation. And when someone feels obligated to do something, our body, mind, subconsciously, will see that as something to sort of resist. Like the number one fact of human behavior is if you tell someone to do something, they will not. Right? So especially after 2020 and George Floyd, I think there's a lot of feelings of obligation. We have to do this. And that creates that sense of urgency, that brings in this perfectionism that is never interrogated. It brings in this sort of sense that, oh, don't do it. Like, you've probably heard the fight, flight, freeze, and spawn. I have added 2. There's 50-50, which means people want to cut it down the middle. Equality in inequitable situations does not resolve the problem. But really, the second one I created is fret. Fretting is one of those anxiety or survival responses that stops progress. It's like, okay, we're ready to launch the initiative. However, do we have enough people in the focus group? I mean, I don't know. Is it the right time to put it out there because this thing is happening in the politics? Do we have to take it back to the drawing board? And that fretting is what it stops things. So really, the biggest thing to think about, and it's the hardest thing to do, is we have to leap into the void. We have to be willing to go into the absurdity of what it means to be in society, a socially constructed society, because we don't have a template. I challenge you to think about a time in our history, human history, anywhere, where there has been a society that reflects what the traditional collective narrative of social equity is. We don't have it. We talk about it, we create policies around it, you don't do it. So if anything, take anything away from what I say today. Do the thing. It's going to be hard. It's going to hurt. There's no template. It's going to be scary. It's spelunking into a cave. But if we do not take that risk, if we do not get into that good trouble, if we do not put into our strategic plans and our initiatives and our intentions the danger, the fear, the shadow work of this, it'll never come to fruition, and we need it to. I'll stop preaching.
Oh, I love that. And I think, like, yeah, that all really resonates with me, and I think is really real in the way that at Transwa and in my consulting work, things get so hung up on hesitancy and fear of making a mistake and fear of doing the wrong thing, and then we have nothing, right? I love that fret response. I think that is so accurate. Another thing that I think about is there just is this sometimes maybe a lack of understanding like of how interconnected things actually are, and they're so much more interconnected than we tend to give them credit for, I guess. Like even just talking about like transness and anti-transness, it impacts like every aspect of life. Like reproductive issues, just looking at this like little list, like reproductive issues are not screened the same for trans folks and understood the same for trans folks as non-trans folks and intersex folks, of course. Food access directly tied to economic stability and employment, and trans folks are very frequently discriminated against, abused, have negative experiences in workplaces that either directly lead to unemployment or build up over time to a point of disability level identity-based stress. And then even transportation. Like I so frequently hear no mention of like gender affirming care or trans inclusion in transportation spaces. But on average, trans folks are one of the demographics that travel the furthest for care because our needs tend to be specialized and it's really hard to find affirming providers, right? So like all these things are so interconnected, and it's so much more important to like center that in the work. And anyway, yeah.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Jen, who just wrote. She said that she's with coordinated care, and they've been looking at the fact that Medicaid is very likely going to be targeted and is going to go away. And that care, 20% of trans people, as you saw from the slides, are dependent on Medicaid. Where are our people going to go for care? And we're concerned about that as well. And I don't know, ChrisTiana, Serin, I don't know if, I mean, I think one of the things, I get overwhelmed. I sit and I listen to both of you talk, and I think about these huge systems that sit out there. You know, one system right now being our federal government, and they're not on our side. They're not going to take steps to help us. So I look at somebody like Jen, who's writing here and saying, what can we do to close the gap for care? And you know, one of the things that I've been noticing is providers who are in private practice, who are in private clinics, who are in places that are less dependent on federal funds, who are going to have to pick up the slack here. And that's a lot. That's a lot to ask of people. Plus, there's not going to be insurance coverage for a lot of our folks. You know, if Medicaid goes away, you're looking at a big chunk of our community that's going to lose care. They're going to lose care. And that's very real. So I want to know that people like Jen are having these conversations within your organizations. It's like, how can we help? And you look at the federal government basically holding hostage federal funds. That's a lot of power. Like, we can't argue. I noticed that Seattle Gender Clinic is here represented today. Don't know if you want to step up or not, but I've been doing my best to try and find out what care is the gender clinic in Seattle actually offering right now, because I can't get a sense of that. I know that a lot of the care is not being provided, and I get it. I get it that Children's Hospital covers so many people. And when you look at our small numbers, you say, well, we can't lose all the federal funding for all these other people when it just doesn't stack up. I get that. I really do get that. However, what are we going to do? You know, what are we going to do to these kids who have been on gender affirming care, have been on hormones, and are going to have to detransition because they're not going to be able to access that care? And Planned Parenthood is getting hammered. That would have been the go-to place. So I'm not going to solve this. I don't know that we're going to solve it today on this panel. But it makes me feel good that, Jen, you and your organization, you are asking these questions. You see us, and you see the need in this organization. I was on the phone 2 days ago with an 18-year-old kid who, because he's still under the thumb of his parents, is being forced to go to inpatient care in the state of Idaho. My heart breaks about that. I want to kidnap this kid. And I don't have any power to do that. So how do we keep, I mean, to me, the question is real basic at the moment. It's how do we keep our kids alive till the end of this administration, if it ever ends. I'm down to just really, how do we address the suicidality of our kids? That is going to be an incredibly difficult problem.
Yeah, I think another thing that like people often don't realize, and this is a really good point for folks who are looking at ways to incorporate this into like advocacy conversations and why we should prioritize funding and investing in this. So, mental health and physical health issues come out in our healthcare system one way or another. So, either we're going to do really good care, taking care of the things people ask us to take care of, like gender affirming care, or we're going to be dealing with suicidality, extreme mental health issues, horrible chronic health issues later in life. Like, yeah, so one way or another, the healthcare system gets to deal with this, and we can decide how we want to deal with it. Do we want to deal with it in a way that is compassionate and caring and loving and centers the humanity of the people in the system? Or do we want to wait and see what the results are later on?
Thank you, Serin. Regarding to what you're just talking about, the fourth question is, what do you want decision makers, policy makers, funders, clinicians to hear and act on today? Everybody's welcome to respond. Feel free to jump in. Any
I
thoughts?
guess I can start. Um, the disability justice as a framework has 10 guiding principles. I'm going to see if I can remember them. It was intersectionality, leadership of those most impacted, anti-capitalist politics, recognizing wholeness, accessibility, solidarity, cross-movement solidarity, interdependence, a collective, access, collective, liberation. There's one more I'm forgetting. I think, yeah. But what I say about that is that it's like in those 10 principles, there is an opportunity to, as Linden was talking about, like it is big, it's huge, it's intergenerational, it's entrenched, it's steeped into the mycelium of our society. We aren't, as individuals or organizations or even governances, going to be able to just fix it, stop it completely, right? It's a train that's going really, really fast off a cliff. And even if we are able to get to the emergency brake and start to pull it, there is still that momentum that we're going that after that we're going to have to consider. And I think that that's important. I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that and sort of see the systemic view, and then to make it digestible to see yourself within a systemic view. What is it, as sort of like seeing yourself as like a piece on a game board or something? What's your next move going to be? So I think that in some specifics, I think it's important to consider like social. And it's not to say that I'm not saying this because I believe that people don't know this. I think sometimes it's good to sort of like be reminded that equity is not just a DEI statement. It's a daily practice. And it's a daily practice that's really difficult. And it's a daily practice that you're going to continue to come up against barriers and resistance because we live in a situation with intersectional institutions and systems that is just not doing this. Like if we have an inequitable system, equity is not going to be able to thrive or even start in the inequitable system. In order to start to have those systemic inequities and institutional inequities, we will necessarily have to go against the grain, go upstream, negotiate policies, procedures, cultural expectations that is not in alignment with the stated goals, right? So if your approach, and with disability justice, why I think that's important in a way that it can be really helpful is I think that if you, especially if you have the ability or you have the decision-making power to consider who is in the room, especially like within your decisions or with your care, your governance. It's important that your approach to care and governance is informed by the lived expertise of those most impacted. Like I always say, there's the knowledge of what you can learn, your degrees, your trainings, all those things, and then there's the wisdom of lived experience, and it's at the intersection of that we will find the answer. If we don't, it's incomplete and it's likely doing harm, right? So I think for funders, need to stop waiting for the most intersectionally impacted folks to write these perfect grants, which takes their own time and energy, while they're actively surviving structural violence, right? Like we need them to start just investing in this now, and to do so again with that stand the torpedo sort of attitude, because we have to. Yeah, you might get called by IRS or something. Sure, you might, and put that into your strategy. We're not going to continue to fund what we believe in our mission, and as a result, we're going to have whatever these strategies or tactics are. A lot of my clients are just beefing up their legal team, and looking at this as an opportunity to create case precedent, right? For clinicians, I think it's important to interrogate whether or not you see transness as a risk factor, rather than sort of recognizing that whole person as a space where there is knowledge and resistance, right? So I think that there is a lens to be updated, that a lot of times when folks are advocating that well-intentioned, the well-awareness is that people may still have perspectives that are implicitly harmful, or can cause harm, individual harm, because it's really hard to go to a doctor who's like, oh no, I'm going to help you. I'm going to make sure that I understand that you haven't had your pain treated in a while. We're going to treat this pain. But let's talk about, as a Black person who's under-resourced, are you in an environment with a lot of drug use? Because we want to make sure you're not going to be targeted. I'm like, why is this even a thing? Just see me as a whole person and have you be part of it. And finally, the policymakers. I have been saying this since, I feel like since, if we want to be fair, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I think it's important for policymakers and legislators, whether internally, especially in governance, to stop having symbolic gestures of legislation and policy. It's not about an honor system of a person, usually a white man, sits at a desk and signs a piece of paper. It's not like there's going to be this magical mist that goes over the land and people are going to wake up and say, oh, I think I'm supposed to do whatever initiative on that paper today. It's going to take time. So we need policies that's going to have the strategies and the tactics in it that is intersectional, that is multidimensional, and that includes what the resistance are going to be, what the barriers are going to be, what your strengths are for those things, what your weaknesses are for those things, and how you're going to navigate those barriers and resistances. And we need policies that intervene in the actual material conditions of our communities, as opposed to theoretical or philosophical considerations. Yeah, that's great for the knowledge. But make sure that you're not putting policies in place that the people with lived experiences this is not going to help me at all. Or it might make things worse. So I guess, okay, I'll close with, I think there is, for everyone, including myself, some sort of epistemic privilege that's important for us to interrogate and check, right? So if you are in a space and you are the only voices that you trust in that space, and you look around and everyone is credentialed or seen as capable or whatever that is, through the systems that are excluding us, excluding intersectional spaces, then the decisions are only going to replicate that exclusion. And working at the intersection of policy and how policy impacts everything else, there's a lot of this idea of but we learned it, we took training, we took advocacy, I worked with this population for so long, I know what they need. No, I mean that's valid and relevant, but no, we don't need a voice. We don't need a voice for the voiceless. We just need to pass the mic, right? So liberatory leadership is going to require a willingness to listen sideways, not just up the chain. And that's going to be really difficult because power sharing is something that people just do not want to do. And it's also something, like I just reiterate, it's not going to be easy. If you're doing social equity work and you feel, and it's feeling good, and you and about just like feeling good and like what they call a eudaimonia sort of space where you're working really hard, but you have that like happy sort of thing. I'm talking about like it shouldn't feel like a pizza party, right? It shouldn't feel like it should be beyond having just a half day staff in service. Like that's not the point. The point is to take that information, make yours cost-benefit analysis plan, individually, as a group, as a team, as an organization, as an institution, as a system, and then go out and do it. And you fail forward, because you're going to fail. You're going to fail. I guarantee you're going to fail. And when people fail, they feel like they want to stop. Oh, well, we tried that and it didn't work. No. You have to keep failing forward. Think about something that you're really, really good at. And think about the first few times you did it. You weren't doing it as well as you would have, as well as you do now that you have failed forward towards whether mastery, knowledge, whatever you want to call it. So if you know that if you don't play a guitar and you know that you're not just going to pick up the guitar and start playing like Flight of the Bumblebee or something, then you need to apply it to this as well, regardless of what the social construct is about getting it perfect the first time and never making a mistake, and you have to have all of these things. All you need to do is the world aside, the community says that is helping or not. That is all that matters. So, okay, I'm gonna stop preaching.
Thank you. I love that, and I think it's so important that just to really understand, like, trans and gender expansive and intersex people, we are out here. We are ready to have these conversations. We are ready to engage in leadership and be included and centered in these ways. Like, people are ready for this. They are wanting to do these things, and they're wanting to make progress for, we want to make progress for ourselves and our communities. And I think, like, if the question of like what is something that we could, like, a really small tangible action is, if you I think I would love to invite folks to think of one opportunity that they know of where they could invite a trans or gender expansive person into that opportunity. And if you are someone who has opportunities like that, please consider making them paid opportunities, because trans and gender expansive people, it takes a lot out of us to show up and constantly have to, re-go over these things. And like, we for sure want to, but it's also very taxing. And there's a lot of just huge funding cuts and a lot of folks losing jobs and things like that right now. So I think, yeah, like really looking for and being creative of like, okay, how could I engage a trans or gender expansive person in one of these critical conversations? Yeah.
Linden, any thoughts?
Well, I think I tend to go to a place of, as you sit here today listening to us, what can I do when I leave this meeting? What is one thing I can do when I leave this meeting? And for those of you who work in systems like the insurance companies, for those of you who have say-so for hospitals, insurance companies have power. They have some power. In my hospitals, I'm going to make sure that everybody in the ER understands that trans, intersex, and gender diverse people exist. I'm going to make sure that there are bathrooms they can use. Let's talk about something fundamental. In your place of work, are there bathrooms that people in our community can use. I mean, they're coming after the bathrooms. It's going to be one of the next big things. And I don't know, I guess in a way, Danielle, I'm going to move us into the next question, which we're talking about, what kind of hope do I have? I just want to say that, people are looking to Washington State as a model. And we are in the middle of the bullseye on the part of the federal government. They are coming after us in the same way that they're coming after California. Look at what's happening in California right now in terms of immigration. They're going after them on that, and they're going to come after us in that regard as well. So what are we going to do as a state to be that model for other states? We are a refuge for families that are moving out of Texas and across the Midwest. They're coming here. How are we going to resist the onslaught of the federal government? And I can say, from having been a part of the last legislative session and the passing of the bill 1276 that gave us gender inclusive schools across this state, that Washington State is going to go down kicking and screaming. We have a legislature and we have an administration right now that they're going to fight. They're going to fight with everything they have. So how are we going to help that? How are we going to help them do that? I encourage people to become known to your legislators, your state legislators. I want to encourage people to not forget, when we talk about trans health, don't forget about the schools. The schools are really going to be the target right now, and us in particular, because we now have a law that says that every school in the state of Washington must be a gender inclusive. Do you know what that means? It means that our schools cannot discriminate based on gender identity and gender expression. There's going to be a ton of backlash about this, particularly in the eastern part of the state. So I'm really encouraging you in all your work not to forget your local schools and your local school boards. Be alert. What can you do? You can monitor what's going on in your schools. You can write letters to the editor in your community. You can try and educate. You can be monitoring what's going on. So it's big systems, but it's also in your neighborhoods and in our neighborhoods. And the truth is, we are the west side of Washington, and we are our own entity, and we are the seat of government in Washington, and we do have people who will listen to us. We have got to access that, and we have got to use that. So that's my hope. That's my hope, is we're going to continue to have a state that we can rely on to at least go down fighting.
Thank you so much for sharing, Linden. Okay, just to continue the conversation with Serin and ChrisTiana, in the face of a hostile national climate, what gives you hope right now? Where are you seeing pockets of resistance, healing, and transformation that our audience can learn from or support? If you guys have anything to add, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I can go. I think that for me, there's two things that give me personally a lot of hope, and I think my staff at Transwa and the clients that I work with a lot of hope. And that is, so two things. One is really reflecting on our long history of resistance and power. Trans folks are at the center of our justice movements going back for decades, probably centuries, right? And we carry so much of that power with us today. And just knowing that we have that ancestral wisdom and power and survivance to draw on, I think really gives me a lot of strength. And then the other thing that I think gives me a lot of hope is that drawing on that and kind of continuing that tradition of our community taking care of itself is a lot of trans and gender expansive folks, we've really turned inward to our own communities and supporting each other. And that really gives me a lot of hope, because there's so many of us, and we're so talented and intelligent and powerful, and I am just in awe of my transgender expansive community members, and the ways that they are engaging with community, and like each person within their own circle of influence trying to shift these tides and trying to create change, is really significant.
I guess what gives me hope? I guess even in the midst of this like hostile climate we've been talking about, right, where like trans and non-binary intersex folks are legislated against and surveilled, erased, I still see so many seeds of hope, because hope isn't passive. It's a practice, right? It's a survival strategy, and it's being cultivated right now, like in mutual aid networks and DIY care systems and in community co-ops and healing circles, street medicine, storytelling, artist resistance, and all of these things. I have seen this in my work and in my advocacy. I've seen it in disabled trans youth, like turning their grief into like zines. There's these great zines that are being put out right now. Canva is a great place to make zines. People having their gardens, not calling it victory gardens, but having those gardens as sort of having a way to commune more with the earth and to get back to that grounding, and archives and trying to preserve and first create and preserve the history, the narratives, the knowledge and wisdom of the trans community. I see it in our, elders and caregivers who build like these rituals that are resilient, and I see it in every movement that someone chooses community care over like carceral logic, right? For me, as a Black, disabled, non-binary person, a girl majority, right? My hope lives in storytelling, like the audacity to exist fully in public, in complexity. I don't believe in performative allyship. And so I believe in transformational action. So if you're a policymaker, if you're a funder, if you're a clinician or researcher, I know that I talk really big systemic. I was sitting here thinking, well, what are the next 3 steps for people? These are the next 3 steps I would say to reviewers. Number 1, shift from performative to participatory, if that's something that's happening. Like, don't just platform our stories and put it on the internet or website. Resource our leadership, right? This means funding trans-led organizations, hiring trans and intersex consultants at the beginning and throughout the projects, and removing those bureaucratic barriers to access. If the people most impacted are not co-creating the policy or the research, then the work is extracted, period. Point blank, period. Number 2, build infrastructure for care, not crisis. Something I saw when I was working at Madison Clinic, stop reacting to the backlash, which of course is going to happen, and start building those systems that can help protect us before and while the harm is hitting or trying to hit. This means embedding trans-affirming care into medical school curricula, if that's something that you can do, creating legal protections at the municipal and state level that you can advocate for, supporting housing first models or social housing models or tax credit models for trans and intersex folks, because prevention is liberation work. And then finally, protect trans data like it's sacred, because it is. Push back on erasure in data systems. It's important to fund longitudinal participatory research that centers trans and intersex folks as knowledge holders, especially as all the other funding is going away. If there's foundations and stuff that has their own funding, this is where it needs to be sort of ferried to, and advocate for inclusive metrics that reflect the spectrum of our lived experience, right? Like, you can't fix what you refuse to measure. We're not optional data points either. We are the future that you need to plan for and need to be amplified. So yes, I still have hope. I don't believe it's naive or idealistic. I think it's sharpened. I think it's deliberate. I think it's informed by history and science and spirit and survival. I believe in the power of trans people, not just to survive, but to shape the future, to be leaders of that. And I believe everyone in this room has a choice to passively witness injustice or to actively become a part of the system that can dismantle it. Right? Because the truth is, we don't need saviors, we need co-conspirators right now. And in this moment, neutrality and silence is violence. But action, doing this thing, the action is the love language, the action is the work. So if you love us, protect us, fund us, stand with us. Don't look away. Don't be scared. It's going to be hard. But please continue to go and fail forward and do this work. It's going to be scary. But maybe if we can digest that it's going to be scary and hostile, it can become part of the strategy of how we move, as opposed to being seen as something that is a barrier to prevent us from going to that action.
Daniela, Claudine just put in a text a few minutes ago that reminded me of something I really wanted to mention. And I hope this isn't the ending because it's going to bore you all to tears, but I think it's really important. Claudine said they already came after the bathrooms. They said that segregation is okay. I want to just give you this thought. Be careful who they is defined as. Because right now there is part of the game of this administration is to confuse the heck out of us, because we've got executive orders, we've got Congress, we've got the U.S. Supreme Court, and we've got the U.S. Supreme Court contradicting themselves right and left. We've got executive orders that aren't law, but a lot of people think it's law, but they're not law. And then we've got our state, which is enacting all of these incredible non-discrimination laws. So I want to just caution you, and you know, this is really hard, but you have to be really clear on which law applies to you. Just because the U.S. Supreme Court said that in the state of Tennessee, they can ban gender-affirming care, and just because the U.S. Supreme Court said that that law applies to all states that have bans on gender-affirming care, that law does not apply to us because of Article 10 in the U.S. Constitution, which says that the federal government can issue decisions and they may accord rights to people. And as a state, we have to provide all the rights that the federal government says we have to provide. However, states can provide more rights than what the federal government gives. And that's where we come in, because we have extremely excellent non-discrimination laws in the state of Washington. We don't have a bill that bans bathrooms. We don't have a bill that bans gender-affirming care. These aren't our laws. So look to the state, and our state laws govern for us in terms of the discrimination laws. It's going to get really confusing, and trust me on this, because there's going to be some initiatives coming out to try and undo the gender inclusive bill that just got signed into law. It's going to be very confusing. Make sure you are listening to the ACLU, that you are listening to Lambda Legal in this state, that you are listening to Transwa, right, Serin, about what these decisions in the U.S. Supreme Court mean, because what they say may or may not apply to us. And as you'll notice, they're loving right now, saying this applies to the whole country, and on the other hand saying, oh, we're going to let the states decide this stuff. So as a result, we don't have a fucking notion what applies to who here, and that's part of their game. So know your sources. Know your sources. Okay, was that clear or not?
Well, Linden, ChrisTiana, Serin, thank you so much to each of you for your generosity, insight, clarity today that you offer. Not just an analysis, but vision, and not just responses to harm, but pathways toward healing, advocacy, and transformation. We know that many of you in the audience are holding your own experience, questions, and challenges, and we want to make a space for those now. We'll now move into our audience Q&A. If you haven't already, please drop your question in the Q&A box. Feel free to share what's coming up for you, whether it's a practical question or a point of reflection, something you're sitting with, anything you have to share. We encourage you to interact with the panelists, make your questions, learn more if you need to, or just simply participate. Anyone have any question that they would like to make to the panelists now?
We just got one from Michaela, and I'm just going to read this out because it's really important. Yes, I tend to look at Western Washington as being all liberal. Duh, they're not. That there are certainly folks up in the northern part of Western Washington who are part of efforts to fight the gender expansive schools bills. So that is going on currently. Thank you, Michaela, for pointing that out. We have to be paying attention to our school boards. They have a lot of power. However, every school board member takes an oath when they're sworn in to follow the state law. So that is the hook where you come back and say, no, we're not going to ban bathroom use in these schools because that is against the state law.
Anyone else? Well, we have some questions for you. What's one thing that you heard today that challenged or expand how you think about your role? For the participants, what questions are you sitting with now that you weren't before the session began? Or what's one barrier or dilemma that you face in trying to offer affirming care or support in your organization? If anyone feel brave enough to participate, we would love to hear from you. If anyone have any thoughts.
Well, I'm going to make an announcement if nobody's going to say anything. Somebody just mentioned about up in the north part of the state. I'm going to be in Ferndale on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock doing the Science of Gender at some church up there. I'm trying to remember which church it is, but it's part of Pride because Ferndale's doing a Pride parade this year, and I'm going to be part of the conference that's going to be given on Saturday for people that live up there. So if you're not doing anything, I'll go look at what church it's at and put it in the chat. Love to have you come join us.
Okay, Keiko have a question or a thought. We would like to hear from you, Keiko.
Can I just jump in real quick, Keiko? Linden, thanks for sharing that information. We'd love, this is Michaela Vendiola. I'm the tribal liaison with Northtown ACH. I'm also a alumni graduate of Ferndale High School, so I really appreciate hearing that you're going to be there. And if my family and I weren't already planning to go to Seattle for the powwow that's happening this weekend, I would have brought my daughter out to the events that are going on. But just really thank you and the rest of the panel for your words today. And, it's summer break and my daughter was here listening, and it's an effort to, pass the teaching and knowledge along to the next generation to be prepared for what's to come. So thank you so much.
Sarah, have a question too. Sarah, we would like to hear from you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Billington. I'm not sure I'm from DDA. I don't know if I can lower my hand here. I go by she, her. I believe it's the Linden School District that is suing the state of Washington and OSPI to opt out of all of everything. But Ferndale is pretty great for the most part. I mean, it's, but thank you for going out to speak. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. Keiko?
Hi, I just have a question about the bill that was passed about gender affirming schools and, kind of, I guess, any thoughts about what is to come because of that bill in terms of federal action, kind of, placing an even larger target on Washington State. I know in the past I was the gender inclusive schools coordinator for a local school district, and I love public education. I 100% support it, and public education has a million ways of burying policies and procedures that they do not wish to enact. And so just curious about kind of does anyone know, Sarah, you mentioned Linden School District. What is the response of school districts to this new bill, and what should we be preparing for in terms of efforts to roll back those protections for kids?
I can tell you that the difference this time around is that there will be actual consequences for schools that go through the back door to attempt to deny kids protections for gender identity and gender expression. But this is going to be fought out in the courts. There's no doubt about it. And so I think we're all going to just stay tuned. I do really recommend that you monitor your school districts. You can do recalls on school board members. And if school board members are violating their oath, and their oath of office is to apply state law, and if they're going around that, either directly or indirectly, that's a violation, and that's a violation of their oath. We're going to see some tests of that. I have a hunch coming up in the next months.
Thank you, Linden. I just want to acknowledge a commentary that Chess Claire had here in the chat. As part of the trans community who also works for the state health agency, I am always wondering what kind of coordination and improved collaboration we as agencies and community-based partners can do. Is there a committee or work group on this? Speaking as a person in community, I would love to see better action and coordination regarding all that was discussed here. Serin, ChrisTiana, do you guys want to give your opinion? Follow the commentaries in the chat.
I think, ChrisTiana, you had a really great point. I don't know if you feel like giving more voice to that, but.
Okay, I unmute myself. Yeah, I can just read it for folks who can't see the chat, because I know it's sometimes inaccessible. I had wrote in response to a Serin, that one of the biggest barriers I face is institutional risk aversion. So, because, like I was saying, like, this is the work that's you're going to have to go against the grade, and you're going to have to buck up against the system. I always say that the system is like a Trojan horse hydra, right? Like there's a bunch of them they'll come out once you think that you have it, and they all have these different heads, and if you cut it off, and they'll make more heads, right? I don't know if you've ever seen microscopically a virus, and they have these great big heads with these little tiny legs, and the heads explode, and there's more viruses that come out, right? And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what inequity is. It's just always just like this always exploding, and there's more and more and more. And I think that it can be really overwhelming, on top of knowing that you're going to have to buck up against the system. So I think it's not a judgment that systems supposed to talk about. I have systems supposed to talk about equity until it threatens their comfort budget or political capital. And that's just true. If someone was to ask me what are the biggest barriers to institutions actually doing the thing, it will be those three things. It's going to be uncomfortable. It might impact your budget, both in terms of the resource investment, but also in terms of your funding and your political capital. you're like, well, we don't want to get in the news and have our company's name in people's mouths and they cancel. And I'm like, look, that might happen. That might happen. Right? Because if the system was open to changing and embedding equity and deconstructing inequity, then we would be there. Right? So to continue with what I put in there, I've had to navigate rooms where people would rather protect policy than protect people. The dilemma is, how do you hold integrity and stay resource when the system punishes truth telling? I think that it's one of those things that, like I talk about, goes to the shredding. Again, I think that it's important, and I'll say this because most of us are sciencey people here, right? We all know that when we are in we're in a threatening situation, or we're in a situation that we feel like we have to protect ourselves, that there's certain ways that our body mind works, right? That is just automatic, it's autopilot. So what really has to happen is to be a brain nerd. When you have an amygdala response, to remember that you are not going to be able to access your prefrontal cortex or your meta thinking as easily as you would otherwise. That's the function of the visualization of the cortical pathway. My background is in neuropsychology. If you know this, and you start to see that your body-mind is starting to fractal off impacts that is in direct violation of your morals, it's not to say, oh no, and I messed up. It is something to interrogate and hold space for that fail forward, right? And the last paragraph I put in the chat is, I've been sitting with this question of how we can design systems that not only include trans and intersex folks, but are actually built with us in mind from the ground up, like not retrofitted. It is like, an equitable system is not going to allow equity to grow or thrive. And it's not that we're going to take the inequitable system and retrofit equity into it. It's not added on. But it has to. We're going to have to reconstruct it. It's not that the computer has a virus. It's that the operating system, foundationally, is created to go toward inequity. So we're going to have to build a new operating system. And that's going to require this to be centered from the start. Like the shift from inclusion to intentional design is just what I put. I think, we talk about universal design, but what does that exactly mean? And are people willing to move with the dynamicism and the absurdity and the social construct? So that's sort of what I was saying. I think, I guess to say really quickly, I know, and I've been told throughout my career that I talk in these big concepts, and so I acknowledge that, and I want to say that and acknowledge that here, and affirm that some of these things I'm talking about, you might be there, but yeah, it's so easy to say, but it's going to have all these things, and I'm going to tell you, like I say, easier said than done. I'm not saying like, hey, you're going to go out here tomorrow and you're going to start like fighting the system and getting all these policies changed and all this kind of stuff. Or even that by next week you're going to have all of those the internal fortitude to go out there in the pain of change work and stuff. It took us so many hundreds, maybe 1,000 years to get to this point. Civil Rights Act of 1964 is 61 years old. It's living memory. There are people in power, not just this current administration, but from 1964 on, that their upbringing, their conditioning, their understanding of life was pre-civil rights. We're still in that bubble. So to see, I guess the only thing I can think of is do the work to see what it is for real. Beyond the social constructs of things, beyond sort of how the common way of talking about it. What is the structure and what is the framework and what is the makeup of what we're in, and you as a thing about The Sims, what is your character in The Sims going to be doing to be able to get to this operating system and change it? And it's not going to be easy, and you may not experience the products or fruit of that in your lifetime or your tenure. But it's I think that's the other thing that holds people back, but I think it's really important to not think about this in terms of your own sort of Freudian ego style of like, I want to see those results. I want to see that. Don't do it for that, because you're not going to. Do it for the trans or intersex child that you will have in front of you, do it for their grandchildren. You know, do it so that that person can live a full life, not that you're going to be able to see it for this person in the current moment. And I think that if we are able to do that and suspend our fear and our hesitancy and be willing to embrace and go forward into that dark night and fight, I think that we can get a lot.
Thank you so much, ChrisTiana, for your thoughts and your insights. We really appreciate to hear your voice. As we move forward to our close, I want to invite everyone else to take a moment in one sentence or word, drop into the chat. What is one commitment or insight you're carrying forward from today?
Danielle, do you mind if I add something while folks are thinking about what their commitment or insight is?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, related to this kind of question that they're prompting us with of the commitment or something like that, we at the midpoint of this call, we had over 55 people on the call. And that is 55 people who care about this topic and could choose to take an action today, any action. If each of us went out today and did one thing, like to connect an opportunity or center a trans or gender expansive person, that's 55 opportunities that could come out of this learning session, and that could have huge ripple effects. So I think just even if your commitment is like, I choose that I am going to do something, I'm going to do one thing, even if I don't know what it is right now. I think that's extremely powerful. And I just really appreciate the invitation from North Sound for the space, and also for asking us to think of what our commitment.
Perfect. So as we close, we offer our deep thanks to each our panelists for your brilliance, your labor, your leadership, and all of you who join us today with open hearts and active mind. Before you leave, please take a moment to fill out our session survey. It really helps us to meet your needs in the future learning sessions. Our wonderful Tessa is gonna drop the link in the chat. We will appreciate your feedback. We continue to have these learning sessions. Our next learning session is September 17. Climate Action for Vulnerable Communities, 10 to 12. And the next one is Disability Advocacy, November 19 of 2025, 10 in the morning to 12 p.m. Thank you so much for being here, for participate. We're going to stay a little bit longer. If you have any questions, if you want to ask anything, feel free to. Thank you so much for the panelists again for being here today.